Remember Jigsaw from the movie Saw? The guy who tortured people and tore their bodies apart? Or Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the one who cut down anyone who stepped out of his house with a chainsaw? Now imagine, what if that wasn't just a movie? What if it was real? Yeah. This man actually existed. He lived in the same world as us. He bought food at the grocery store, took the subway, laughed, and ate people. Jeffrey Dahmer, he's not a Hollywood fantasy. He's not a made-up character on paper. This is the real-life version of the most terrifying, most disturbing horror movie ever made. The only difference? There was no the end. His neighbors thought he was just a normal guy. But inside his apartment, they found a human head in the fridge. I could go into even more detail, but honestly, this story is already dark enough, and you can probably feel that just from what I've said. So let's not drag it out. Before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment. If you've done all that, then switch your brain to universe mode, because out there in the cosmos, nothing's gonna stop you from watching this video. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA. He became known worldwide as the Milwaukee Cannibal. His troubled childhood basically destroyed any chance he had at a normal future. Let's talk about how bad that childhood really was. Jeffrey's parents, Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, were, at first, just ordinary people. Lionel was a chemist, and Joyce worked as a teletype machine operator. They lived a pretty normal, happy life at the beginning, just like any other family. But Joyce suffered from chronic depression. During her pregnancy with Jeffrey, she took a lot of medication, way more than she should have, which doctors later said might have affected Jeffrey's health when he was born. Her unstable mental health had a huge impact on Jeffrey's early years. As the first child, he was called Jeff, and at first, he was cheerful and outgoing. He even had friends. But when he turned 5, everything changed. He started suffering from ear and throat infections that led to a double hernia, a painful condition that required surgery. During the operation, it said that the anesthesia might not have fully worked, and Jeffrey experienced extreme pain. At one point, he even asked the doctors, "Did you cut off my private parts?" After that, the once happy kid became quiet, withdrawn, and emotionally distant. When he was young, Jeffrey witnessed something strange. One day, his dad was cleaning out animal bones from under the house. Jeffrey watched as Lionel laid the bones on a tray, and instead of being grossed out, Jeffrey became fascinated by the sound they made when they clinked together. That's when he started playing with animal remains, and what began as curiosity slowly turned into something much darker. At home, things weren't good either. His mom, Joyce, was battling mental illness, and his dad was always busy with work. The house was filled with constant arguments and tension. Jeffrey just wanted peace, but instead, he felt completely alone. Some of his happiest moments were the rare times he went fishing with his dad. But overall, the chaos at home made him even more isolated and emotionally unstable. School wasn't any better. He was shy, awkward, and often bullied. Classmates made fun of him constantly, and Jeffrey started to see himself as an outsider. When he was about 10, things got worse. His mom was hospitalized for her mental health, and their family basically fell apart. That's when Jeffrey's behavior began spiraling. At school, he started acting weird. Sometimes he'd be funny and outgoing, making people laugh. Other times, he'd completely change, pretending to have seizures or mimicking people with disabilities, just to get attention. He'd even bleat like a goat in class. It was all an act, but behind the jokes, something dark was growing inside him. Jeffrey's classmates never really respected him. To most people around him, he just seemed cold, strange, and detached. But in reality, Jeffrey was actually very intelligent. IQ tests showed that his intelligence was above average. If he wanted to, he could have gotten great grades. But no one really knew what was going on inside his head. When Jeffrey was around 14 or 15, dark thoughts started creeping into his mind, thoughts he never shared with anyone. He kept them locked deep inside. And if you're wondering what kind of thoughts these were, well, they were disturbing. Dahmer's teenage fantasies often involved death and violence. He hadn't killed anyone yet, but he constantly thought about death, power, and control. That growing obsession eventually led him to commit crimes that mixed death with sexual violence. During his senior year of high school, his parents decided to get a divorce. That was it, Jeffrey was completely alone now. Just a few weeks after graduation, he decided to act on the fantasies that had been building up in his mind. This would become his first murder. One day, Jeffrey saw a young man standing by the road, hitchhiking. He stopped his car and offered him a ride. The young man's name was Stephen Hicks, and he was 19. For Jeffrey, he was the perfect type. Jeffrey told Stephen he was on his way to a music festival and invited him to come along, but first, he suggested stopping by his place for a few beers. Stephen agreed, and they went to Jeffrey's house. At first, everything seemed normal. They drank, talked, and listened to music. But soon, Jeffrey's mood changed. When Stephen said he wanted to leave, Jeffrey panicked. He didn't want him to go. In a sudden burst of rage, he hit Stephen over the head with a dumbbell, knocking him unconscious. Then he strangled him to death. Afterward, Jeffrey dismembered the body and placed the parts into 5 large garbage bags. He loaded them into his car, planning to get rid of them somewhere far away. But on the way, a police officer pulled him over for driving erratically. The officer asked him where he was headed so late at night, and why his car smelled strange. Jeffrey stayed calm and polite, explaining, "I couldn't sleep. My parents just got divorced and I've been feeling really off lately." He told the officer that the garbage bags in the car were just household trash he was taking to the dump. The officer believed him, and let him go with just a warning. Jeffrey drove home instead and hid the bags in the basement. The next day, he took out the remains and cut them into even smaller pieces. He boiled some of the flesh in acid to dissolve it, crushed some of the bones, and scattered what was left around the backyard. For the next few days, he obsessively followed the news, expecting to see something about Stephen Hicks being missing. But nothing ever came up. No one suspected him. That gave Jeffrey a terrifying sense of freedom. He had killed someone, and gotten away with it. Now, he wanted to do it again. A little while later, Jeffrey's father, Lionel Dahmer, realized his son was living alone and wasting away. Concerned, he told Jeffrey he needed to find a job. But Jeffrey wasn't interested in working. He spent most of his time drinking. Lionel eventually convinced him to see a psychologist, but that didn't help either. So Lionel suggested another idea: college. He enrolled Jeffrey at Ohio State University, hoping it would give him some structure. Jeffrey agreed, but he didn't stop drinking. The memory of killing Stephen Hicks haunted him constantly. At that time, Jeffrey would donate his own blood just to get money for alcohol. He barely studied and failed most of his classes, eventually getting expelled after his first semester. Still, Lionel didn't give up on him. He thought maybe military life could straighten him out, so he helped Jeffrey enlist in the U.S. Army. Jeffrey agreed, and he was sent to San Antonio, Texas, where he trained as a medical specialist. There, he learned a lot about human anatomy, and that only deepened his dark curiosity about the human body. He actually seemed happier for a while, enjoying the training and even socializing with others. For a brief moment, it looked like things were finally getting better. After 6 months, Jeffrey's physical and social skills improved so much that his father was proud to finally see him smiling again. But that happiness didn't last. After completing training, Jeffrey was assigned to a military base in Germany. But his drinking problem followed him. His superiors eventually noticed and reported it. After repeated incidents, Jeffrey was discharged from the army. Broken with nowhere to go, he contacted his father, who arranged for him to live with his grandmother. For a while, things seemed okay. He helped around the house, went to church with her, and even read the Bible when she gave him one. But deep inside, those dark urges never went away. And here's something important to mention. I won't dwell on it for long, but it matters to the story. Jeffrey wasn't interested in women. He was attracted to men. One day, while sitting in a library, a man passed him a note. It was a sexual invitation to meet in the restroom. Jeffrey didn't accept it. But that moment, that one small thing was enough to reignite the twisted desires he had been trying to suppress for 9 long years. After moving back to Milwaukee, Jeffrey started spending more and more time at gay bathhouses and adult bookstores. He'd look for a certain type of man, someone who fit his fantasies, and invite them to have a few drinks. What they didn't know was that Jeffrey always added sleeping pills to the drinks to knock them out. Eventually, the management at one of the bathhouses caught on. One of the men had been drugged and ended up in the hospital. Jeffrey was immediately banned. But that didn't stop him. He just found new bars, new men, new hunting grounds. Over time, he was kicked out of several more places for the same reason. Then came January 1987. Jeffrey had just turned 25 when he met Stephen Twomey, a young man from Gurnee, Illinois. Stephen worked as a waiter and part-time dancer. They hit it off quickly and decided to get a hotel room together. Once again, Jeffrey used his usual trick. He slipped sedatives into Stephen's drink. Later, Dahmer described what happened that night. "I put some pills in his drink, but I didn't do it to kill him. When I woke up the next morning, there were bruises on my arms and on his chest. Blood was coming from his mouth. He was hanging off the side of the bed. I don't remember killing him. But I know I did." Jeffrey now had a dead body in a hotel room, and no plan. He panicked, then came up with one fast. He went out, bought a large suitcase, came back to the room, stuffed Stephen's body inside, checked out at the front desk, and called a taxi. When he struggled to lift the heavy bag, a hotel employee offered to help and even joked, "Man, what do you have in here, a dead body?" Jeffrey smiled and said, "Yeah, a dead one." They both laughed. Nobody knew he wasn't joking. He took the suitcase back to his grandmother's house and dragged it quietly down to the basement. There, he dismembered the body and disposed of most of it by flushing parts down the toilet and pouring others into the drain. Months later, when Stephen's family reported him missing, police assumed he had just run away. Even though he had left behind clothes, personal items, and an uncashed paycheck, investigators dismissed the case, thinking he'd disappeared on his own. By now, Jeffrey Dahmer was slowly transforming into a serial killer. He no longer hid his urges. Over the next 5 years, he would go on a horrifying killing spree. Whenever he had free time, weekends, nights off, he'd go out searching for another victim. Only 3 months later, he found his next one. This time, it was a 14-year-old boy he met near a bus stop in the city's club district. Jeffrey told him, "If you come back to my place, I'll give you $50. I'll bring you home in the morning." Sadly, the boy agreed. They rode the bus back to Jeffrey's grandmother's house. She was asleep upstairs. Jeffrey drugged the boy, strangled him, and kept the body for several days, continuing to perform sexual acts on it before finally dismembering and disposing of the remains, flushing most of it down the drain. That boy's name was James. He was American, and he had run away from home 2 days earlier after being beaten by his stepfather. His mother immediately reported him missing, but once again, police didn't take the case seriously. Jeffrey's next victim was Richard Guerrero, 22 years old, a Mexican-American man he met outside a bar. Jeffrey told him, "Come with me, I'll pay you for your time." Richard agreed. They went back to his grandmother's basement. Jeffrey drugged and strangled him, then dismembered the body. This time, he placed the pieces in black plastic garbage bags and threw them out with the trash. The next morning, the garbage truck came and took everything away. When Richard's family reported him missing, police once again assumed he'd left voluntarily. His sister knew that wasn't true. She convinced the family to hire a private investigator. Richard's mother spent her days praying for her son's return, while his father, who worked at a golf course, used all their savings to pay the investigator. Unfortunately, the man turned out to be a fraud. So what made Jeffrey Dahmer so lucky? The answer is simple: police negligence. Every time someone disappeared, officers assumed they had just run away, and they closed the cases without digging deeper. But eventually, Jeffrey's luck started to run out. His grandmother, who had once loved having him around, finally had enough. He wasn't the kind, church-going grandson she once knew. His work hours were strange, and there was always a foul, rotten smell coming from the basement. She couldn't stand it anymore. Jeffrey had to move out. He found a small apartment of his own. And it was there, in that quiet little place, that the next chapter of his gruesome crimes would begin. He found another victim on the street. This time, it was a 13-year-old boy named Cason Sintasamphone. Jeffrey offered him money in exchange for taking some photos. The boy agreed, and they went to Jeffrey's apartment. But when Cason realized Jeffrey's intentions were wrong, he got scared and ran away. He made it back home and told his parents everything that had happened. His parents immediately went to the police and filed a report. Jeffrey was arrested and charged with sexual assault against a minor. The court sentenced him to 1 year at a correctional facility in Milwaukee. What's unbelievable is that just a few days before he was supposed to start serving his sentence, Jeffrey found another victim. This happened on March 21, 1989. The victim's name was Anthony Sears, a 24-year-old man. They met at a bar, and the conversation between them went smoothly. But Anthony couldn't go back to his own place because his girlfriend was there. Jeffrey, on the other hand, didn't want to bring him to his own apartment because he was worried the police might still be watching the area. So they decided to go to Jeffrey's grandmother's house instead. Jeffrey took Anthony straight to the basement and, following his usual pattern, killed him. But this time, he did something different. He cut off Anthony's head and genitals, placed them in plastic bags, and disposed of the rest of the body like before. During the trial, Jeffrey's lawyer managed to get his sentence reduced. In the end, he only had to spend 10 months in the correctional facility. Jeffrey's father even wrote a letter to the court asking that his son be placed in an alcohol rehabilitation program while serving time. Unfortunately, the judge read the letter too late. Jeffrey served his full sentence but never received any therapy. After his release, Jeffrey made some security improvements in his apartment. He installed surveillance cameras and an alarm system. But despite that, his chaotic life continued just like before. It's worth noting that Jeffrey had sexual relationships with dozens of men throughout his life, though not all of them ended up being killed. His next murder happened on June 24, 1990. That night, Jeffrey was sitting in one of his favorite bars. There, he spotted a 33-year-old man named Raymond Lamont Smith, someone who perfectly fit his type. Raymond, known to his friends as Ricky Beaks, had a criminal record and had spent some time in prison. His friends were used to him disappearing for weeks at a time, so when he went missing again, nobody panicked. But this time, he was gone forever. Jeffrey got him drunk, killed him, and performed sexual acts on his corpse. Then he dismembered the body, cleaned the skull, painted it, and kept it as a souvenir. A month later, Jeffrey struck again. This time, the victim was 27-year-old Edward Smith. Jeffrey offered him $100 to pose naked for some photos, pretending to be a professional photographer. The last time anyone saw Edward was at the club, talking to Jeffrey. In September 1990, he committed another murder, 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Ernest was tall, athletic, and fit Jeffrey's ideal type perfectly. He agreed to pose for $50. Once in the apartment, Jeffrey gave him a drink laced with strong sedatives. But this time, the dose wasn't strong enough, maybe because Ernest was a big guy, or maybe Jeffrey miscalculated. Ernest regained consciousness, and they started fighting. Jeffrey struck him hard, breaking his neck and killing him. After this murder, Jeffrey took his depravity even further. He cut off one of Ernest's body parts and stored it in the fridge, planning to eat it later. This was when he fully crossed the line and became a cannibal. Of course, human remains start to decompose after a few days. The smell in Jeffrey's apartment became unbearable. Neighbors began complaining about the stench. Jeffrey brushed it off, saying it was just spoiled meat. To deal with the mess, he bought a large plastic drum and filled it with acid, dissolving the bodies inside. Still, the awful smell wouldn't go away. but Jeffrey didn't care anymore. On September 24, 1990, he killed again. This time, the victim was 23-year-old David Thomas. David didn't have a stable home and sometimes stayed with his girlfriend. Since no one would be looking for him right away, he became Jeffrey's next victim. Then there was a 4-month break, after which the killings began again. One victim was a nurse who dreamed of becoming a model, along with 2 other men. They all met the same fate. But on May 27, 1991, one of the most disturbing chapters in this horrific story began. That day, Jeffrey targeted a 14-year-old boy. He was the son of Laotian immigrants, and his name was Konorak Sintasamphone. If that last name sounds familiar, it's because it should. Konorak was the younger brother of Kaysen, the boy who had previously escaped Jeffrey's apartment. It was Kaysen's case that had led to Jeffrey's earlier arrest. Jeffrey brought Konorak home the same way he had lured in his older brother before. He gave the boy drugs to knock him out and began his twisted experiment. After a while, he stopped and went out to buy some liquor. While Jeffrey was gone, Konorak regained consciousness and tried to escape. You might think the boy got lucky, but don't jump to that conclusion yet. As he stumbled down the street, 2 women saw him. He was naked, confused, and clearly terrified. Horrified, they immediately called the police. When officers arrived, Jeffrey was already on his way back from the store. What happened next honestly sounds like something straight out of a movie. Jeffrey calmly approached the officers and told them that the boy was actually his 19-year-old boyfriend, and that they'd just had a fight after drinking too much. You're probably thinking, seriously? They believed that? And yeah, it's insane. The police didn't even ask Jeffrey for ID. If they had, they would have found out that this same man had been arrested before, for assaulting this boy's older brother. Instead, they walked the drugged, half-conscious boy right back into Jeffrey's apartment and even helped him onto the bed. When the officers noticed a strange smell coming from the apartment, Jeffrey told them his refrigerator had broken and that the bad odor was just spoiled meat. They accepted his explanation and left. Once they were gone, Jeffrey continued his experiment. He drilled a hole into Konorak's skull and poured salt inside, claiming later that he was trying to create a zombie. The boy died soon after. Jeffrey would later use the same method on several more victims, injecting boiling water or acid into their brains, killing 4 or 5 more men that way. This horrifying chain of murders stretched from 1978 all the way to July 22, 1991. On that day, Jeffrey brought home another man, Tracy Edwards, pretending it was just for some photos, as usual. He prepared a drink laced with sedatives, but Tracy noticed something was off about the taste and didn't drink much of it. The plan fell apart. At one point, Jeffrey managed to get one handcuff on Tracy's wrist, and that led to a violent struggle. Jeffrey pulled out a knife, but Tracy fought back hard, hitting him and managing to escape from the apartment. Outside, he saw a police car and ran to it, frantically explaining what had just happened. The officers followed him back to Jeffrey's apartment. They asked Jeffrey for the handcuff key, but of course he didn't have it, because his usual way of removing handcuffs from previous victims was simply by cutting off their hands. Jeffrey tried to keep them out of the bedroom, but the room was filthy, and the smell alone raised suspicion. When the officers looked around, they made a horrifying discovery, a stack of Polaroid photos showing dismembered bodies. It became immediately clear that they were standing in the home of a serial killer. That was the end of Jeffrey Dahmer. Investigators searched the apartment and arrested him on the spot. Inside the fridge, they found a human head. In a large barrel filled with acid were decomposing body parts. In the freezer were plastic bags containing human hearts and livers. There were also pieces of human flesh cut from the thighs and arms, apparently kept for eating. They also found bleached skulls, severed genitals, and even a complete skeleton. The photos didn't just show the corpses, they showed Jeffrey performing sexual acts on them. Later, Jeffrey said, "Keeping this enormous secret for so many years was unbearable. I had no choice but to face the consequences. Once I confessed, I finally felt some relief. There are no more secrets left." His confession lasted 6 weeks. The written report was 159 pages long, describing every murder in graphic detail, from the killing of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, to his failed attempt to capture Tracy Edwards. Jeffrey claimed that, at first, he never intended to kill anyone. But over time, his desires grew darker. He said he wanted to control his victims completely, to turn them into living zombies who would never leave him. In his own words, "Killing them didn't satisfy me anymore. So I tried something new. I used a small drill to make a hole in their skulls and injected fluid into the front part of the brain, to keep them alive but under my control." At this point, there was no question about whether he had committed the murders. He openly admitted to all of them. The only question left for the court was whether he was sane or legally insane. Wisconsin didn't have the death penalty at that time. If he were found insane, he would be sent to a mental institution indefinitely, meaning he could one day be released. The trial began on January 30, 1992. The case attracted massive public attention. Security in the courtroom was extremely tight, and even bulletproof glass was installed. Jeffrey sat quietly for 2 weeks, listening to the prosecutors and his defense attorneys. His father Lionel and stepmother Sherry were present during the hearings. The defense's strategy was simple. They didn't try to prove he was innocent. That would have been impossible since he'd already confessed. Instead, they wanted to convince the jury that he was mentally ill and should be committed to a psychiatric hospital. They argued that no sane person could commit crimes this horrific. The jury found Jeffrey Dahmer legally sane and guilty of 17 murders. He was sentenced to 900 years in prison, which was equal to 14 life sentences. While in prison, he was attacked twice. The first time, he survived. But the second attack was fatal. Another inmate beat him to death. Jeffrey had once said that he didn't want his body to remain after death, he wanted it to be completely destroyed. His wish was granted. He was cremated, and his remains were never kept or displayed. Even though he's gone, his story inspired countless documentaries, movies, and TV shows. If you ask who suffered the most from all of this, I'd say it was his father. Lionel Dahmer tried everything to help his son, but nothing worked. Later, he wrote a book titled A Father's Story, where he shared his pain and regret. And that's how this chilling story ends. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave a like and a comment, and for now, goodbye.